Thank you.
Don't forget to switch your mobile phones off. And so, let's go. We'll look at insert number 1, and here we just sum up what we linguists say. So there is the familiar form and there is the polite form. The familiar form, French, is a language which has it. It is tu, and the polite form is vous. So taking French as a basic example, we call one the T form and the other the V form. T for the familiar, and V for the other, Hungarian, tegezés. And the other is, of course, magázás, önözés, tetszikezés. There are 3 equivalents of the V form in Hungarian, of which we will speak, and Peter will have a lot to say. Look at number 2. This is now current Hungarian, and I just wanted to show to you that the red one is the familiar form, and the others are the polite forms. And that is also that there is also a difference, of course, in the verb ending, as in French, of course. Tu parles, you speak, and vous parlez, you polite speak. And so in Hungarian as well. So we have, I chose the verb hesital, which we use in Hungarian just like in English, so that it is easier for you to see. Not every Hungarian verb is like hesital, but yeah, this is that's what usually we do. Okay, so the hesitals and the plural is ti hesital, talk. It nicely has a different ending, shown with a hyphen. And then you have the V form, maga hesital, maguk hesitalnak, more polite. And then the next one is the same, except that the pronoun is ön and önök. And you usually distinguish, at least my generation, this is now sort of shaking up, but my generation would use the maga form with people that you know, but even very well, but you're not on those terms. Whereas ön you would use to strangers. So that is a difference. Now, and then there's the V respect, and that would be hesitálni tetszik, and that means that you have to use a special auxiliary verb, tetszik, of which we will speak again. Now, can we have number 4? I'm sorry. Can we have number 3? Yes, that's right. Current English. Well, I was trying to find equivalents of these 4, and of course the you hesitate will be the same because there's no such grammatical difference, but maybe by using, whether you simply use you, or whether you say, I know, Jim, you hesitate. I know, James, you hesitate. I know, Mr. Hill, you hesitate. Depending more or less on how well you know, how much you want to express your, I don't know, deference to the person. And the plural, of course, would be simply you guys hesitate. I know you guys hesitate. And then it will be, I know Jim and Trish, you hesitate. Or one more formal, polite. I know James and Patricia, you hesitate. This is almost cold, I think. And then I know, Mr. and Mrs. Hill, you hesitate, but will you sign immediately? Yes.
So these are attempts to render something of the atmosphere of the Hungarian pronouns, but they're hardly equivalents, are they?
Attempts, he says. Yes, not solutions, certainly. No.
Yes,
no, of course.
I don't like the word solutions at all. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Indeed. And there are, of course, many other ways to express. We were just talking about strange things like how the Christian names are coming in more and more frequently. May I tell you just one little anecdote? I studied at Cambridge, and there was this student. He wasn't a student anymore yet. This was a sort of diploma course, and he was teaching history in a school, a girls' school. And he asked me to come and talk to the girls about the current situation of Hungary. That was in the 70s. And I went in, and I didn't know where he was. There came a bunch of girls, and his name was Dominic Bellinger. And because I came from the continent, I thought it was more polite to pronounce both halves of his name. And so I said, "Hello, girls, I'm a guest here. Can you help me to find Dominic Bellinger?" And they said, "Oh, sure, of course." And then I gave this talk, and a week later I met him, and he said, "Oh, I'm so grateful that you came to talk to us. And now the whole school knows that my Christian name is Dominic." They hadn't known. He was Mr. Bellinger. And Peter and I were talking about the two women prime ministers. There was Mrs. Thatcher and there was Theresa May. Did you notice that? When Thatcher was in power, I remember the radio always said, "The Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher, said da-da-da-da-da." But not the Prime Minister, Mrs. May, said. She was Theresa May. Everybody knew that Thatcher was called Margaret, but that it wasn't somehow polite to insist on people's Christian names. This has changed a lot. Okay. Well, yes, and then number 4 is just a tiny little example from a translation by Peter Sherwood, yes, from a book called Vera by a Hungarian writer, Greccio Christian, or Christian Greccio. And Vera is a girl of about 12 or something like. How old is she?
Yes.
No, that's
11 or 12.
That's
yes.
right.
Yes.
Anyway, and her papa and his best friend Béla, that's just a man's name in Hungarian, are having a blazing row. And Papa says, "Ne haragudj, hebegi a papa, béci." And the other guy says, "Ne bécis." English translation, Peter?
Well, I tried my best here. It isn't possible, because béci is a diminutive, or more technically, in linguistic terms, a hyperchoristic form of Béla.
Yeah, well, Thomas and Tommy, wouldn't
Tommy.
it? Yeah.
It's that sort of term. And then a wonderful thing you can do in Hungarian is turn it into a verb. So, bécizni, there would be...
The double Z is the verbal ending. Turn it into a verb. Yes, yes.
Well, the single Z is enough. It's
Peter.
the
Yeah, all right, Peter, yes.
The second Z is the imperative.
Yes, you're right, Peter.
Right. So the situation is that you can turn any of these diminutives, if I'll call it that instead of hyperchoristics, into a verb, and it's something like to call someone by that term. So don't call me by the diminutive béci. Don't you dare call me by the diminutive béci.
Yeah, yeah.
You're trying to foist this on me. It's a situation in which I won't have it. So I tried my best here, and this is what I came up with.
I would call this a solution, Peter.
It's an attempt. It doesn't solve it, I don't think. But there's a limit to what you can do. Some things between the two languages are what I call irreducible differences. They'll simply work differently. The languages work differently.
Well, that's the beauty of it, of course. Please
that's why
note...
it's worth translating, I should emphasize. If it was easy, it wouldn't be worth doing.
No. Please note that in one language, Hungarian, you have endings attached to the word. And so it is solved at the word level to express something. This is called morphology in linguistics. In English, nothing like that happens, but it is solved by the position in the syntax. This is called syntax, the word order, basically. I remember when I started learning English, there was some little story very similar to this. The guy was talking to the girl, and that the girl's father is a tyrant, and he was talking about him as Napoleon. And she said, "Don't Napoleon my father."
Yet.
And I, being a beginning student, I thought this meant my father is not called Napoleon. I didn't notice the trick, of course, of the syntax in it.
But in writing, you can use these single quotation marks, which are really helpful, I think.
Don't you Bela old boy me.
Don't you Bela old boy me.
Yes.
Something like that.
A solution.
An attempt.
Peter, I give over to you, and now you talk about
next
the pre-war
next slide.
honorifics.
Yes, so here I'll have a few examples from Kostolányi Dezső, whose very famous novel, I hope most people have heard of Édes Anna, has been translated twice. Once immediately after the war by a very interesting character whose English was really outstanding, Ádám Nádasdy, and second, more recently, although even that is more than 30 years ago now, by George Sirtes, who mainly known as a poet, but also as a distinguished translator from Hungarian. So in a preface to the book, George Sirtes makes this remark about the old pre-war forms of address, which have no direct equivalent in English, things like nagyságos úr or méltóságos úr, and there are lots more, which denote subtle distinctions in civil society. He correctly says these are generally used by lower ranks in deference to those above them and are quite precise in their application. Again, very good remark. And look at what he tries to do. I have tried to imply these by tone and manner and point them up when they are an integral part of the comedy or of some social strategy. So here's a big thing, pre-war. He has to try and deal with it somehow, and this is his general comment. Okay, next.
Yeah, number 6.
Number 6. So here are some examples from the 7 is from Édes Anna. The 2 different versions are indicated by the year in brackets after it. And here is, one of the classics, Kezét csókolom, méltóságos asszony, and it's repeated in the same sentence, Kezét csókolom. Well, Ádám Nádasdy tries, I am honored to see you, madam. I am deeply honored. George Sirtes, your servant, ma'am, your servant. So here we are. Interesting differences. I'll leave it to you to judge which you think is better or more appropriate. I wouldn't like to say, really, although I do have an opinion. The interesting thing about madam is, of course, it's from Latin. Mea domina goes into French, madam. Madam shortens to ma'am. To the queen, people meeting the queen had to be told that you mustn't say ma'am, you have to say ma'am. I hope you know. And then, of course, the ultimate shortening is when it becomes just a syllabic M, yes'm, in old-fashioned maids used to sort of say that. So abbreviation of these terms because you say them a dozen, 100,000 times a day is to be expected. Okay? Another one from Molnar Ferenc was an extremely famous playwright. He was famous in America particularly, but also here in the UK. And so famous that P.G. Wodehouse was involved in adapting his play. This famous one, the play's The Thing. Actually, it was... the last adaptation was by Tom Stoppard in 1984. He completely recast it and called it Rough Crossing at the National Theatre. I know because I reviewed it. Here is a playwright talking to Dvornicek. The playwright calls the footman, it's the footman, Moga. Dvornicek, every reply in the Hungarian ends with nagyságos uram. And when a lady is mentioned, she's ő nagysága, her ladyship. In the adaptation, Wodehouse simply uses, he translates or adapts this with just sir or yes, sir, simply. Which is, of course, what I suppose a footman might really say. Yeah. So there we are. Now we come to really important literature, as translated by...
Really important linguistics, Peter.
And linguistics, but...
Okay, so this is called now Shakespeare's thou and you. How do they come into the picture? Translate or abandon into Hungarian. So let's see number 9 first. Second person pronouns in early modern English. And they do the following. They have case, nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive. And the singular was thou and thee and thy or thine, depending on other factors. So when you talk to one person, normally you would use this. And the plural was ye, and the plural accusative was you and your. So the nominative was ye. So ye can sing well, and I know you very well. There was a grammatical difference. Now, can you see those little daggers, the dead symbol, which I put up there? It's important that the dagger in the singular is up in the category. So the singular as such was eliminated from the language. We never use the th pronouns thou, thee, thine anymore. Whereas in the plural, it was only the word ye which was abandoned, and you and your are still used. The Bible up to 1950, I think, before the New English Bible came in, okay, that was a great breach with the th tradition, and they abandoned the th completely, saying that people no longer use it, and the Bible is not a museum, and you want people to understand what is there. Okay. In number 10, you can see an example. What sayest thou? Okay, modern English, of course, you can see what do you say. In the middle, you have the plural. What say ye? That would mean, what are you guys saying? That was the plural. What say ye? What sayest thou? Can you see the ending sayest? That also went together with the thou pronoun. So that was a grammatical category. Now, in Shakespeare's King Lear, you have a nice example of the use of these two. One, Lear is talking to a man who is an old friend, but he doesn't realize, and this man disguises himself. He's called Kent, but he pretends that he's just a soldier coming to serve Lear because he's afraid that the old man is going to be sort of, I don't know, going to go mad, which happens actually. Anyway, so he comes up to the old king and offers his services. And Lear says, who wouldst thou serve? So, okay, so that's a normal thing. Downwards, you use thou. And Kent answers, you. And Lear says, dost thou know me, fellow? Again, the familiar form. And Kent says, no, but you have authority. That's the classic way of exchanging. And I could, that's my translation, I could mirror this really faultlessly in Hungarian. Even today, this might happen, you know, if a young sort of job seeker or soldier or whatever comes up to a respectable old man, this might happen. So he says, kinek szolgálnál, that's the familiar form, magának, that's the polite form, ismersz engem, fickó, do you know me, fellow? And says, nem uram, de van valami a tartásában. Okay, so this is where I could seamlessly and painlessly mirror the original in Hungarian. But this is not always the case. Let me...
12.
Here we go. Number 12, that's right. This is really the same, but it's much more problematic. This is again from King Lear, and it is Regan, one of the daughters of Lear, talking to him that there have been scandals in the play because Lear said he no longer wants to be king, but then it turns out that he does want to be king in certain ways, and the daughters are upset. What's going to happen? He wants to have 100 soldiers with him, 100 soldiers with him in the princely palace as guests. Okay, and Regan and Goneril, the two daughters, are actually they're afraid of letting 100 soldiers who are not under their control but under Lear's control. But Lear is no longer reliable. They would like to reduce the number of his entourage. And she says, "Oh, sir, you're old. Nature in you stands on the very verge of his confine." Sorry, I read it from here. "You should be ruled and led by some discretion." Discretion rather means decision or policy. "That discerns your state better than you yourself." This is still true today, of course. Now, I translated according to the grammar. I said, if she uses the polite form to her father, what else? I mean, to such a father anyway. If she uses the polite form, I will use the polite form. And so I wrote, using the Hungarian polite form, apám maga öreg. Az életereje már közelít végső határához. Fogadja el, hogy irányítsák olyanok, akik magánál jobban látják helyzetét. Paradoxically, this is in one sense a modernization. I will tell you why. And in another sense, it makes it a more antiquated kind of text. Look at number 13, where there is a famous old translation, an excellent classic by Vörösmarty, a great poet in the Hungarian language, from 1856. He translates, how should I say, very carefully, very punctually, but he uses the familiar form. She speaks to her father in the familiar form, in the T form. Oh, sir, very interesting. He keeps sir because it was so exotic to them in the middle of the continent in 1856. So they have milord and sir and all that, the English, honorifics. Ó, sir, te már öreg vagy. Természeted határa szélein jár. Neked már jó tanács kell. The meaning is perfect, but it is strange. Now, I thought if she did this would almost, and that's probably what happened, this would put the whole play in the Middle Ages. And probably Vörösmarty, look at the date, 1850, the great romantic age, the triumph of the costumes, the triumph of sceneries. They had real castles built up on the stage, and everything looked so old and so Shakespearean. Today, we don't want that anymore. You know, Hollywood, of course, has provided all that, and if you want that, you go to Hollywood, and they can do it very well. In a Shakespeare play, we want an empty stage and two people coming in and talking to each other. And in that respect, today, it would be strange in this family, in this relationship, for her to use the to form to her father. So, as you can see in the green table, I changed it. No, I didn't change it. I translated it in the polite form that Shakespeare has. You, well then, Old Lear uses thou to everybody, and nobody uses thou to him. This almost, how should I say, puts him on a pedestal, makes him head and shoulders above the rest of the people in the play. However, this is terribly old-fashioned in current Hungarian. There are still families in which this is done. We know such families. My husband used this to his parents, for example, in the 1970s even. So he would say, apám, de maga legyen szíves, jöjjön ide, anyám, adok magának ezt, and so on. That would be completely normal. I even knew married couples who would use the polite form to each other. And this is all gone now and sounds very, very old-fashioned, which I don't mind. I don't mind my Shakespeare translations sounding old-fashioned. I just want to confess to you that I achieved this with a trick, because Vörösmarty, with his across-the-board familiar form, sounds timeless, whereas I try to find a little bit old-fashioned. Now, there are moments when, however, you just can't do anything, and that is A Midsummer Night's Dream. There is the boss, Fairy King Oberon, and the footman, Puck, and they use the same type of duality. So Oberon says, this is thy negligence, still thou mistakes, or else commits thy knaveries willfully. Because Puck, anointed the eyes of the wrong guy to fall in love, and so there's a terrible confusion now. So he says, this is thy negligence, still thou mistakes. Okay, Puck answers, believe me, King of Shadows, I mistook. Did not you tell me I should know the man by the Athenian garments he had on? Of course, they didn't realize that there were two young men clothed in Athenian garments in the forest. Okay. Can you see what happens? Perfectly normal, like the good soldier Kent and King Lear, we have the good soldier Puck and King Oberon. And I couldn't. It would have sounded ridiculous. It would have put them on a sort of, how should I say, on an everyday stage, on a decent middle class stage. And so I use the familiar form, because they're fairies, they're medieval, they can do that. Tessék a hanyagságod, folyton tévedsz, vagy szándékosan kevered a bajt. Okay, that's the familiar form. But Puck answers in the same grammatical form. Hidd el, árnyak királya, véletlen volt. Nem te mondtad, nem téveszthetem el, mivel hogy aténi ruhát visel. That is to say, we have three strategies. One is the oldest strategy that most Shakespeare translations use, using the familiar form, very much like in the Bible. Okay. Second, what I try to do is to mirror Shakespeare's text and to have the two different forms, even between daughter and father, and so on. And the third is, again, to ignore and to abandon this difference. Peter.
Okay. So the next thing is the use of tetzik, which of course exists in an ordinary way as a verb. Tetszik Leónak a program. Leo likes the program. Or if you want it the other way around, the program pleases Leo. Tetszik is actually the same verb originally as tessék, which originally means may it please you. So that's how that works. And then there's the formula that has developed. I suppose, I don't know how old this is. Do you know how old this tetsikelish is?
19th century.
19th century, yes. So it's mikor tetszik relaxálni. When do you relax? When does it please you to relax? So here is two examples from Molnár's play. The footman Dvorníček asks, miért tetszett felvenni az adatokat? And there's a wonderful rendering, of course, by Woodhouse. Excuse me, sir, would it be taking a liberty if I inquired why you took down those details, you know?
Yeah, the footman speaks in a more elegant way than the writer, of course. Yeah.
Right, yes. Or there's another example, azt tetszett mondani, a végén megtetszik mondani. Again, begins, excuse me, sir, you know, so there's the may it please you ideas conveyed by this initial phrase. But you said that I would find out later on. So, yes. So over the page, I like to quote Edmund Wilson, who's a very interesting writer and critic, who actually learnt Hungarian in order to read Odi in the original. And he has a little piece called How to Say You in Hungarian, which if anyone's interested, you can leave me your email and I will send you the whole piece because it's well worth reading, 4 pages. The extract I've chosen here. There are 4 words for you in Hungarian. Each of them has a plural. Their nuances are a very important part of the same Magyar ceremoniousness, which, before the present regime, he's writing in the deepest Cold War, embroidered personal relationships with a system of class honorifics that seems almost as complicated as the Japanese. Age, rank, intimacy, sex were involved. One had to have grown up in Hungary to get this right, he says.
I love the fact that he compares this to the Japanese, who are very famously so. Yes, you have to use a different form to your aunt if she's a widow and if she's not, and so on. But Peter, he says there are 4 words for you in Hungarian. Yeah. What are they? What is he talking about?
If we think of your classification, there are 4 formulae, I would say, and then it fits rather than words on their own.
Doesn't he want to include the word kend, maybe, which was still in use?
He mentions things like, this would take us much too far, but
all right.
There's things like kend and kegyed.
Yes.
And there was a magazine after 1989 called Kiskegyed. Wasn't there?
Yes.
A very sweet title.
Little Lady or something like that. Yes.
So going back to Kosztolányi, here are some extracts using tetzik. in this, Mr. and Mrs. Vesey, who are a kind of, I would call them upper middle class, as gentry in Hungarian. Mr. Vesey is high up civil servant, and they're thinking of taking on, or at least Ficsor, their caretaker, is offering his niece as maid to them. Édes Anna is the name of the maid. Édes is her surname, by the way. It's not, yeah. Anyway, she asks, is megbízható? Majd megtetszik látni. Bam. Csak annyit mondok a méltóságos asszonynak, hogy meg lesz vele elégedve. The earlier translation, just wait till you see her, madam. That's all I ask. You'll be very well satisfied with her, madam. The more modern translation, and she's reliable, you will see that for yourself, ma'am. I'm not going to make speeches about her. All I will say is that the honourable lady will be well satisfied with her. So this is méltóságos asszony. Yeah, it's, I'm not sure. But, there it is, an attempt to render Hungarian honorific, if you like. Okay. Another interesting item. Anna is very reluctant to say anything in reply to questions from Mrs. Vesey, and Ficsor has been answering in her stead, and suddenly she says, miért nem beszél fiam? Calling Anna fiam, which is quite interesting. Why don't you speak for yourself in the first translation? And can't you speak for yourself, girl? In the second, which is girl as a rendering of fiam, is of course perfectly right here. And I might mention an interesting fact, of which you may not be aware, that up until the Middle Ages, girl in English meant either sex. It could be applied to a boy or to a girl, in other words, male or female. It's only from the 14th, 15th century onwards that girl began to mean a female. So that, before puberty, it doesn't really matter what the sex of one of those little things running around
we used it. Peter, we used this in our family. And, we were 3 boys in our family, so that wasn't particularly obvious. But I could hear it everywhere. I could hear it on the bus, somebody telling off his little daughter for misbehaving and saying, fiam, hogy viselkedsz? This was perfectly all right. And it really meant, the dictionary meaning is my son, but actually something like my child, isn't it? I have 2 daughters.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I use this to my daughters. Yes, fiam.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
It's also husband sometimes says it to his wife, and it's not very nice. It's a kind of...
Well, I don't know. You're right, but that's when a married couple, especially when they have children, they start calling each other as the children would call him. Does that work in English? Would they call each other daddy and mummy, even if the children are not there?
Yes. Well, no. In my case, we only do it when the child is there. Yes.
Thank you, Peter. May I still point? Okay, number 20. You see, the playwright addresses Dvornicek, a grown man,
as Maga.
As Maga.
Or sometimes fiam.
Yeah, again, yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yes, this is. How should I say? This is pleasantly condescending. Can I put it that way?
If If condescending can ever be pleasant, yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, right.
Please note also that politeness very often in all cultures involves talking to someone as if that person was not there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he said, majd meglátja a méltóságos asszony. That is to say, the honorable lady will see. So as if I talked to you, saying, saying, well, does Professor Sherwood agree with this?
Yeah.
And it's him, actually.
Yes.
And this works in many cultures. It seems to be more polite, not to address directly, but to mention where somebody else is. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, 21. Yes. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, I mentioned that there was King Oberon and Puck, the servant, and that in Shakespeare they use the classical downwards, upwards difference, which I felt was not possible between fairies. Unfortunately, fairies is a republic and everybody speaks the same way. Also, I did the same with the young aristocrats the young lovers who are all young aristocrats. They switch sometimes from one to the other. And I said, no, you can't do that. You have to use the familiar form. Plus, there are the real king and queen, Theseus and Hippolyta. Again, I couldn't. What I could do, however, following Shakespeare, was the masters. Do you remember there are these masters there who try to stage a play for the aristocratic wedding, and they do horrible things, and they don't know how to play, and so on. They constantly use you to each other. And that is very lower middle class. Not anymore, of course, because everybody uses it. But you understand, it's when you try to be a little bit more posh, when you don't say napkin, but you say serviette. And you don't say the loo, but you say the toilet. And okay, that you still have this, of course, but not anymore in the word you. So what I did was, Snug is the stupidest of the masters. He says, have you the lion's part written? Pray you, if it be, give it me, for I am slow of study. And the manager, Quince, says, you may do it extempore. I mean, you can improvise. You may do it extempore, for it is nothing but roaring. Okay, the lion. So the names, of course, in the original are funny, so I used funny names. Winkley, because he's what is he? A joiner, basically, isn't he? Yes, that's right. Anyway, Winkley. Le van írva az oroszlán szerepe? Nagyon kérem, ha igen, adja ide, mert a tanulásban lassú vagyok. So he's using the polite form. And Tetőfi is his name because he's carpenter. He builds the roofs of the houses, which is Tető. And there's a famous poet in the Hungarian language whose name is very similar. And so I tried to play on that. Nyugodtan improvizálhat, mert az egész csak csupa bőgés. Okay. So in my Midsummer Night's Dream, I thought that this was according to Shakespeare's wish to show that this whole lot of people, the fairies and the young lovers and Puck and Oberon and so on is one thing, and the masters is another thing because obviously they're English. Okay, forget Athens, forget Theseus, forget Oberon.
Right.
They are called Snug and Quince and so on, and not Demetrius and Lysander and Hippolyta and so on. Suddenly you just forget about the whole thing. And we are in London, and they are sort of members of the, I don't know, trade union reading club or something, where they read the story of Pyramus and Thisbe and want to stage it.
Okay.
Over to you, Peter.
Oh, right. Well, now, this is particularly interesting, of course, because at one of the sort of crucial points of the novel, Édes Anna, the nephew of Mrs. Vesey, who's called Jancsi, and is what I call a feckless popinjay.
I love this, a feckless popinjay. Whoever uses such expressions, feckless popinjay?
I thought it would be highly appropriate here.
Okay.
We're talking of the 1920s. Anyway.
Yep.
What happens is that this young man seduces the innocent maid. I wanted to mention in a bracket that in Hungarian, család, family, and cseléd, maid servant, or servant, come from the same Slavonic root, család, and there's been a kind of split in its function, because this is to do with the maid being sort of part of the family, but not entirely, if you see what I mean. So it's interesting. Middle-class homes even today have a small room called a cseléd szoba, which even if they don't have a cseléd anymore. Right, so here it is. This is the crucial few lines in which the seduction is described. So here comes Jancsi. Ne nevessen, ne beszéljen, olyan szép, szeretem, csak magát. Téged, suttogta titkosan a fülébe, téged, s a rövid személyes névmás, mely két ember teljesen elkever, oly mámort gyújtott benne, hogy lázhúlyag fakadt föl a szájpadlásán. Téged, mondd te is, te, mondd nekem, te. A lány nem mondta. Ő azon a mérhetetlen távolságon tűnődött, melyet ez a kis szó áthidalt. So here it is, the actual, a big decision for the translator. What is he going to do? So here the earlier translation from 1947. Don't laugh, don't speak, you're so beautiful, I love you, only you. He whispered softly into her ear, you. That short personal pronoun thrilled him as he said it. It seemed to burn the roof of his mouth. Call me Jancsi, say Jancsi to me. Anna said nothing. She was meditating on the enormous gulf which the word Jancsi can bridge. Here's the 1991 translation. Don't laugh, don't say anything, you're so beautiful, I love you, only you. I love thee. I love thee. Having addressed her formally so far, he whispered the last pronoun. It signified intimacy and seemed to link their identities so closely it inflamed his desire. Even as he spoke, the roof of his mouth broke out in a feverish rash. Thee, say it, thee. You say it too, say it to me. Thee. The girl wouldn't say it. She was reflecting on the immense distance this one little word could bridge. So, interesting, two different approaches. And the 1947 translation reminds us of the switch from Mogart type forms to te type forms in everyday life, actually. And when we have to translate that into English, we can't. I can't get much closer than saying something like to be on first name terms. Yeah. And of course, that is what's happening in 1947 translation, not in the 1991, which brings us to our thou thee problem.
So the 1947, when the guy says, call me Yonchi, it's almost like saying, don't call me Thomas, call me Tommy. Because don't call me Mr. Hill, but call me Tommy. She had been. So. Yeah, she obviously.
I think so. Ádám Nádasdy felt sort of this would be the right thing in that place. For te. If you like. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that George Zerti's, goes back to the form the, which now is well, it's, of course, the book is 100 years old, and maybe it has an air of antiquity about it. And then, where are we? Sorry.
There was one line still on the other slide, 23.
Oh, yes. We should just mention that when you translate from English into Hungarian, the usual V to T turning point is the first kiss. Okay, so that's what I learned, sort of film dubbing or anyway, translating even plays usually do this, yes. So, yes, The Merchant of Venice, but we have no time for that. Okay, Portia and Bassanio, then when they have the first kiss, then in my translation also, they have to use the familiar form to each other. And now, here's a little trick that I played. I want to lead you behind the scenes and show you how we prop up our little tricks. Bernard Shaw, Pygmalion. Two mature gentlemen meet in the street. Both are listening to the horrible way the flower girl speaks Cockney English. But the older gentleman notices that the other mature gentleman is probably an expert because he takes down in phonetic script what the girl is saying. And so at one point, he sort of, even though they are not introduced to each other, and this is an embarrassing thing, but he still can't help it, and he goes up to him and says, I appreciate the way you do this, and aren't you an expert, and so on. At which Higgins says, do you know Colonel Pickering, the author of Spoken Sanskrit? This is lovely, Spoken Sanskrit, because whoever speaks Sanskrit. Okay, it's like saying spoken Latin or something, but even worse, that's right. Worse. Anyway, the author of Spoken Sanskrit, and Pickering says, I am Colonel Pickering, who are you? And he says, Henry Higgins, author of Higgins's Universal Alphabet. This was the phonetic script which he invented. Pickering, I came from India to meet you. Higgins, I was going to India to meet you. So they had read each other's publications and they wanted to meet personally. At which point Pickering simply says, where do you live? So it's like two teenage boys who discover that they are both stamp collectors. And immediately they want to discuss their stamp collections and show each other's stamp collections. So he said, where do you live? And she says, 27A Wimpole Street. Come and see me tomorrow. At which Pickering says, I'm at the Carlton. Come with me now. And let's have a jaw over some supper. And Higgins says, right you are. That's right. They completely forget about the flower girl. And as later in the play, it will turn out that they again and again forget about her feelings, her existence, her person. Anyway, my problem was the following. Two gentlemen especially in London, but even today, would not use the familiar form to each other. That's impolite. Yeah, but they later become very good friends, and they work together, and they move together during the whole of the play. Now, it is obvious the two men of roughly the same age, roughly the same social status, would use the familiar form to each other. So I had to find a point, well, not the first kiss in this case, but I had to find a point where this would tilt over. And I took the courage to insert a sentence. Look at that. Higgins, nem ismeri Pickering ezredest, a szanszkrit nyelvkönyv szerzőjét? Én vagyok az Pickering ezredes. Ön kicsoda? So this is the very polite form, ön, that you use to strangers. Henry Higgins, a Higgins-féle hangírási rendszer kidolgozója. Azért utaztam ide Indiából, hogy önnel beszéljek. I came to see you. Higgins, én meg Indiába készültem, hogy önnel beszéljek. Enough of the politeness. I thought, let's show us our stamp collections. So the older man says, and this is not in Shaw at all, he says, én vagyok az idősebb, servus. Now, servus is a greeting which you only use to people that you use the familiar form with, like ciao in Italian. If you know a bit of Italian, they also have various greetings. Buongiorno to someone who you don't know, and ciao only to someone that you use the T form with. So he says, én vagyok az idős, I'm the older one. That's a privilege always of the older of the two to offer the familiar form. So he says, I'm the older one. Hello. Let's go on first name terms, as it were. They never do, mind you. That's interesting. Pickering doesn't have a first name at all. He's Colonel Pickering. And Higgins only does because Eliza finds out that his name is Henry, and so that she can call him Henry Higgins, of course. Well, no coincidence. So he says, én vagyok az idősebb, servus. They shake hands, obviously. Hol laksz? Where do you live? Wimpole Street 27. Gyere el holnap. A Carlton Hotelben vagyok, kísérj el most. Eszünk valamit, és beszélünk remek. So I even felt that I could cement the transition from one type of address to the other by inserting this. And this was staged, actually, in Budapest, and it worked quite well. Peter, are we finished, or have you got anything else to say?
No. No, but perhaps there'll be questions, and we will do our best, I think.
Don't hesitate to contribute or ask, contradict or suspect.
Thank you very much.